How do we get young people in particular, and older people too, more engaged in our communities to take charge and take leadership? And then once that's done, Kenzie's actually here today. She's part of our voting rights program. So the other 20% of what we do is voting rights, investigation, litigation, observation, and advocacy. And the whole goal is to make sure that our elections are nonpartisan, accessible, and modern. That way, when people get really excited and engaged in their community and their democracy, we have an election system that's reflective of them and that is open and accessible. Come on up front, guys. We have a smaller group. Well, this is getting to be a big group, actually. But still feel free to tweet, text, all that stuff. So in any case, that's Nebraskans for Civic Reform. We've grown a lot since I founded in 2008, and actually Amanda was one of the founding board members, and we swiped her from the board, and she's working for us full time now. And our whole goal is to create a more modern, robust democracy for all Nebraskans.
Great. All right, I'm going to start us off talking a little bit about civic health today, because that's what I get to do for a job. And what I like to tell people when Adam's not around usually, so this is a rare instance, is that I get to help empower people to be better citizens. And that's what civic health really is all about. So why? Why does civic health matter? Why am I talking to you today about it at a Connecting Young Nebraskans Summit? And essentially, I heard a lot of these same themes come through in our lunchtime talks earlier today, and of course, obviously, the morning sessions as well. But really, communities are stronger when we own them together, and so much of the change that occurs happens on a very local and community basis. And as young Nebraskans, as young leaders, you are very much poised to make that change, to be the change maker in your community. So obviously, and research and studies have shown that thriving and resilient economies come out of strong health, civic health, or communities where there is stronger civic health. There's also more accountable and representative government, people that are better equipped to represent you and your needs as a constituency. Come on in. When we have strong civic health. And of course, there's higher trust in neighbors and high social capital. So there's nothing that we as young Nebraskans love more than other great people, right? We're social creatures, we're a social generation. So all of these happen when there is high civic health or a strong civic health foundation in your communities. So that's why we're gonna talk about it today. That's why it should matter. And I am gonna use some data from the 2015 Nebraska Civic Health Index, which is something that Nebraskans for Civic Reform and my predecessor published in April of last year. And before you say, gosh, Amanda, that sounds super boring. You're using US Census Bureau data and you think it's gonna be interesting? Bear with me. Allow me to prove my point. It's actually pretty interesting stuff, and I think you'll find it fairly fascinating. If not, just tell me and tweet something different. All right, so there are 4 indicators of civic health. Essentially, this kind of breaks down the hows of civic health, because really, what is civic health? I like to begin by drawing this parallel, right? So you think about your physical health, and there are some elements of your physical health. Eating well, relatively healthy, exercising regularly, getting a good night's sleep, or going to the doctor. Those are all components or indicators that you're living a physically healthy life. Similarly, there are 4 indicators that you are living a good and a healthy civic life as well. And the first one up is social connectedness. This is pretty exciting because the Census Bureau data showed us that Nebraska is pretty darn good in terms of social connectedness. And you can see the numbers for yourself up here. So let me ask you this question. How many of you in a typical month in the last year have had dinner with members of your household, whether that's a friend or a roommate or a family member, multiple times a week? Solid, excellent. Look at you, connected Nebraskans. What about maybe just once a week? Okay, once a month? Not at all? Great. Okay, so you're exemplary, obviously, is what we knew. But as you can see in this top one, eat dinner with members of your household frequently, 92.7, nearly 93% of Nebraskans say that they do that regularly, which ranks friggin' second in the nation. Don't ask me who's first, we don't care. Quite frankly. So we're extremely good about being connected, remaining connected with people. We often do it around the dinner table or a lunch table, which there's no shame in that. But we also, even if we don't eat with them, we also see or hear from them frequently. Again, making sure that as we're going about our day-to-day business, we're not just in silos. We trust most or all of our neighbors. Again, we're just outside the top 10 in that. You will see one outlier here, and that is doing favors for neighbors frequently. We're ranked 41st. I have a theory about that, though, despite what the data says. Nebraskans are pretty helpful and nice people generally. I think we underreport that on the whole. By grabbing the mail for your neighbor, you're thinking, oh, that's not a favor. It is technically a favor. Most people will think of it as a favor. Nebraskans are just like, that's just what we do. So take that with a grain of salt there. And again, the reason social connectedness matters is because in a democracy, it's a government by the people and for the people, people being the base unit. So don't let anybody tell you that hanging out with your friends, spending time with your family is not strengthening that civic fabric. It very much is. Simply by doing that, you're making and kind of creating a more connected community, which will help pay off down the road. So that's social connectedness. Again, Nebraskans do that very well. Confidence in institutions is the second civic indicator to talk about today. And essentially, it's how much confidence we have in our schools, our financial institutions, our media, our corporations, our government, that they're doing a good enough job, that they have what's in our best interests at heart and are actively working towards that. So again, you can see we rank in the top 10 in terms of school and media, 4th and 5th, not bad. Schools is pretty darn high, 90%, 9 out of 10. So a good indicator that our public schools are doing great, or at least we think they are. And then again, in corporations, we're just a little bit outside the top 10, but not bad. The confidence in institutions matters because institutions, beyond what's just listed up here, obviously, they help support your democracy, right? They help support your community in ways that an individual can't. They give that group power. So when you are participating, either as a parent by going to your school community fair, or going to parent-teacher conferences, either by reading and being an active consumer of your local media, again, you're helping strengthen that civic health in your community, so it does matter. So we do pretty well in confidence in institutions. The third one is community engagement, and we're kind of a meh on this one, to be quite frank with you. We're somewhere in the middle of most of them, but this is where I think a lot of people don't think about civic health. Civic health very much comes down to these community engagement spectrum type of activities. Volunteering, a big one. The estimated value of a volunteer hour in 2013 was $20.13. Not many people get paid that much. So if a volunteer hour is worth $20 and some change, just imagine the value you're bringing to your community when you are volunteering. Working with neighbors, charitable giving, that is an act of community engagement. You're kind of putting your money where your belief system is, right? You want to help improve something with resources. Attending a public meeting, and let me ask this one. I think I know what I'm going to get, but how many of you in the last 12 months have attended a public meeting?
Pretty good.
That's very good.
Yeah.
Most, again,
That's really
this is
good.
a skewed sample because they're all connected, etc. But on the whole, only about 10%, 1 in 10 Nebraskans attend a public meeting, and it's less nationwide. And we're seeing that decrease pretty regularly, partially because sometimes public meetings happen at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, and like, how many of us can get there? So that may need to change in the future if we want to continue to get some good community engagement. And the one thing I do want to point out to you all, Nebraska is in the top 10 for holding leadership roles in organizations, which is very impressive to me and also not surprising in the least. When you are involved in your community, you're naturally going to find yourself coming to a leadership role, especially as a young leader in Nebraska. So community engagement is another key indicator. Again, we do okay on this, definitely some room for improvement. And then finally, political involvement. I think this is what most people default to when they think about community engagement, is just, oh, how involved politically am I? And it is important. It's actually where we rank the worst out of the 4 civic indicators, so that's why Adam's here to talk to you about it. But also, I think it's important to think about voting, registering to vote, especially in an election year, and a big one. And others that I don't think people think about, just discussing politics with friends and family frequently. I know everybody says you're not supposed to discuss religion or politics. I disagree. I think you absolutely should discuss it. You should just discuss it in a very civil, respectful manner, because otherwise you're not going to have the conversations that move these things forward. And it happens, again, on the local level, in your home, in your community centers. So, and then finally, buying or boycotting a product is also political involvement. And I think millennials are particularly primed for buying or boycotting. Essentially, you're voting with your dollar. You do or you do not believe in the product or the service that this company is providing, and so you either buy or boycott what they're doing. So that's just an overview of, again, civic health in Nebraska, where we stand, where you can see yourself as a part of that civic fabric, how you can improve that. Kind of towards the end, I want to give you an exercise, or I want to do an exercise with you called community asset mapping, so you can walk out of here with a tangible plan to impact something in your community based on these 4 indicators. But first, Adam is going to talk to you about political involvement. So go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah.
So this is where we kind of get to the interactive or engaging part. And I'm going to just pass out this right there. Yeah, actually. Didn't see you sneak in there. And I'm going to take one, too. So first off, when it comes to political involvement in Nebraska, millennials are ranked the lowest. That being said, there's a lot of different ways that you measure political involvement. And I'm going to move around a lot because I've got a lot of coffee. That whatever they put in my coffee over there has just got me going here. So in any case, millennials rank really kind of the lowest when it comes to political involvement. And that's not something that's necessarily unique to Nebraska. And I think it depends on the way that you define political involvement. So for instance, millennials in particular are less and less likely to identify with institutions because we care more about causes and individuals. And let's think about that. Why is that? Well, it used to be 30 or 40 years ago that what would happen is if you're really passionate about a certain issue or cause, you'd join something like the Sierra Club or the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the Green Party or, name X organization there. And then what would happen is you'd be a part of an affinity group of some sort. They would send out information, they would organize meet and greets and all that stuff. You'd be on the mailing list, right? These days, information has become much more democratized, for better or for worse. It's almost like it's information overload sometimes, right? Particularly with politics. And so people are identifying less and less with political institutions. And for me, rightfully so. I'm obviously, if you look me up, I'm a pretty progressive guy. But I don't really enjoy the party politics. I don't enjoy it. I don't really connect with it all that much. And I think a lot of the younger people in the legislature with me feel pretty much the same way in many cases. And so what I want to talk to you today about is the importance of being politically involved and particularly running for office. Because the bottom line is if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And if you're not invited to the table, you should bring up a fold-up chair. Because the bottom line is that young people, if we're going to move and advance our state forward and particularly attract more younger people to our communities, whether it's out west or whether it's in Lincoln or Omaha or greater Nebraska, wherever the case it may be, young people have to be in positions of political power because that's where the decisions are made. That's where the resources are allocated. And that's how we determine how we're moving forward as a state. And I don't care if you're as conservative as whatever or as progressive as whatever, young people bring a valuable perspective. And I see it in the legislature. There's not very many of us. There's absolutely nobody under 30 anymore. When I first came in, I was 29. Now I'm 31. But we need to have those voices at the table. And so when you're thinking about running for office, I handed out just a few different pointers right away because I hear a lot of excuses for why you don't run for office. I'll give you an example of one of the things that was recently advanced, online voter registration. Nebraskans for Civic Reform worked on that for 7 years. We finally convinced the Secretary of State and a bunch of people that the internet wasn't just a fad, it wasn't going away, it wasn't, and that was actually part of the problem, was convincing them that the internet was, going to be here, and it was a shocking barrier to getting this policy passed that I had never expected. And so we were able to get online voter registration passed mainly because there were a group of bipartisan legislators that were younger at the Capitol that said, hey, listen, we file our taxes online. We do stuff at the DMV online. Why can't we register to vote? Not only that, it's more secure and accessible, right? Because you have to have an ID and all that stuff. And I'm not going to get into the voter ID stuff, but the bottom line is it's a more secure type of system and it's more accessible. Look at what just happened the last few weeks. In one weekend, we had 10,000 people register to vote online. And it was just because Facebook found out that you could register to vote online, and they just sent out a message to everybody on Facebook. One of the reasons why young Nebraskans don't engage as much is because oftentimes it's a highly mobile population. And because it's a highly mobile population, you don't get re-registered, you're a first-time voter, you don't understand that, hey, listen, I've just moved down the street and I've got to re-register, otherwise I can't vote. And then you show up on election day and you can't vote. And so there are structural barriers, but the problem is that a lot of our government services won't be modernized and won't be brought to where people are at unless there's young people advocating for it. I'll give you another example. Uber is a great example. Uber and Lyft. Has anybody ever used Uber and Lyft? Show of hands here. Yeah, a lot of people, right? Up until last year, it was illegal in Nebraska to, number one, be a driver for Uber and Lyft, and then number two, to even use Uber and Lyft. And for a year or two, we had to convince them, well, why don't you just use a taxi? Well, number one, there's not a lot of taxis around. Number two, the barrier to entry for a taxi cab driver is actually pretty high. And then number three, that's not how people are communicating and traveling and doing things. And so it was myself in a van on the way to the Department of Corrections after a riot down there to go view it. I had 15 legislators in there for an hour and a half. And all of them were like, what is this Uber thing? And so I pulled out my phone and I showed them. There's a bunch of oohs and ahs and you just push this and you can actually see live when it's coming. But it was because myself and Senator Tyson Larson, a person that's very ideologically different than me, were explaining to senators how important this was and how it actually decreases the amount of drunk drivers and other things because it makes transportation more accessible. But it took young Nebraskans explaining some of those things and being in positions of power to do that. And there's countless other stories. Now, how many people in here have thought about running for office? Okay. Did you run for office?
I'm currently.
You're currently running for, what are you running for?
City Council.
City Council where?
O'Neill, Nebraska.
O'Neill, Nebraska, where Tyson Larson is the state senator. Awesome. Okay, you're a bad example. Who else? Who else was thinking? Okay, we talked about this a little bit.
I thought I've been on some legislative campaigns.
Okay.
And thought about it myself.
Okay, but why haven't you done it yet? That's why you were a bad example.
I had two reasons I shared up front. One was the finances, but I know you can fundraise and you can
Yep.
pavement that doesn't cost money.
Yep.
Mostly positions I've been in. I do positions that I'm passionate about and I love.
Yeah.
And they don't afford me the time to be able to be out of.
Takes a lot of
the
time.
office, especially for the legislature.
Takes a lot of time. So time. And maybe a little bit of money, but you know how to fundraise, so you can do it. Okay, who else? Who else raised their hand? Now I'm on the spot, so nobody's raising their hand anymore. Okay, yeah, you.
I'm a single mom.
Single mom? That's tough.
Two little ones, so balancing working full time, a part-time job, and kids.
Yeah.
Activities. How can I fully dedicate myself to this position?
Yeah.
And not developing.
Being a mother and having a job and all those things, yeah. And actually, those types of situations are tough, but I tell you what, we don't have a lot of single moms in elected office because of that, and that voice would be incredibly powerful. And I can talk to you about a few instances down the legislature in particular, but yeah.
Just got scared that one, no one would vote for me, and two, what I don't know anything.
Yeah.
I just moved back to town. I don't know the lay of the
Yeah.
land. I'm scared that someone, some older guy or some other younger guy already got it figured out.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna be in Trump Hillary war.
Yeah. No, definitely. No, those are all good reasons. Fear of the unknown, maybe not a person that's worked on campaigns and understands exactly what the transaction looks like and how building those relationships. I mean, that's a good point. What's another one? Another reason? Another person? Age?
Yeah.
Okay, what about your age?
I think I'm too young.
Think you're too young? Okay. That's another thing that comes up often. I want to tell you right now, nobody is too young unless you don't meet the constitutional requirements. Nobody is too young to run for office. I have seen, and I'm using an identifier here, but think of it universally. I've seen wise old men, I've seen foolish old men, I've seen wise young men, I've seen foolish old men, I've seen wise women, old women, and vice versa. age is a poor proxy for wisdom. It really is. And I tell you this because all perspectives in our elected bodies are important perspectives. And so do not let anybody tell you that you are too young for office, or this person's been waiting in the wings and they have all this experience. Well, good for them. They could go make their case to the voters. I'm going to make my case to the voters. And that's what a democracy is. And so, number one, don't let age hold you back. Because all of those perspectives are really valuable in any elected body. The other thing that I'll tell you is I knocked about, I think it was around 14 or 15,000 doors over 2 years for my election. And I thought there was going to be a lot of people that were like, oh, you're really young. I got a lot of jokes. I got a lot of, how old are you? I'm like, well, I meet the constitutional requirements, you know. And I got a lot of that, right? And most people, 80, 90%, were really, they thought it was very refreshing that somebody young was running for office. And it's because a lot of those people are afraid that young people don't care and that they're checking out. And when you're going door to door, we can talk about this down the road, you're not just going to anybody's door, you're usually going to regular voters. And these are fairly informed people that are really afraid that young people are checking out. And that also young people are leaving the state. And that's something that time after time, as I meet with business leaders, as I meet with political leaders, as I talk to people at their doors, they're acutely aware of how important young Nebraskans are. And they're scared of losing us. And that's my next point, is that as young Nebraskans, we have a lot of political power. And I don't think we ever realize it. When we're down at the Capitol in a committee hearing and people are coming up to testify, we have a lot of people, and I don't think lobbyist is a dirty word actually, because lobbyists represent really important interests. And they give good perspective and counterpoints, right? But oftentimes, lobbyists will come up and, you know, we see them every day, and they testify pretty much every day on one side of the issue or not. When a young person comes up and testifies on an issue who's not a lobbyist, or just a regular Nebraskan, the committee stops what they're doing, and they pay a little bit closer attention. And I've seen it time after time, particularly when young Nebraskans do that. So don't think and don't discount the power of young Nebraskans' voices. Some of the other issues that people brought up, and I just want to address them, and I kind of printed off a quick kind of sheet and guide to follow along. And Amanda, give me a time check when you need your time. Okay.
Yep, you're fine.
Some of the important considerations when looking at running for office is time. And that was brought up a few different times here. It takes a lot of time. And there's no doubt about that. Whether you're running for city council, particularly when you're running for a district race or a race where you can actually knock those doors, you got to take the weekend, you got to take some time in the evening and go door to door and connect with people. And that does take time. And so you do need to be thinking about that. You know, for me, it was a really good time for me to run because I don't have any kids or significant other or anything like that, so I can be selfish with my time. Whereas for some people, they waited until they retired to be able to run. And that might be their life circumstance. That might be your life circumstance. You can get involved in other ways. I'll tell you, though, that people with families and kids, those people that are in office and that were able to make that sacrifice and do that are some of the most powerful voices down in the legislature. Because those are people that represent a demographic that is not well represented down there. Work situation. Sometimes you gotta talk about it with your employer, especially if you work for an agency or a government entity or something like that. Sometimes that is a consideration that you have to take, and you have to run that by them. When you identify offices, you have to think about what issues are you really passionate about. And I want you to skip down to the bottom there. What are the top 3 issues that you really care about in your neighborhood, in your community, whatever it may be? Write down those here as I'm kind of droning on and talking. Write those down. And once you get done, if you look at that issue and you go, I don't really actually know what office would be most effective to address those issues, feel free to email me. And my email is at the top. Because I'll be happy to kind of explain maybe some of the different offices that you should consider. But whatever you do, whatever office that you're interested in running for, make sure it's not just running to run for an office, which I see people do sometimes. Make sure it's an issue you're passionate about. And make sure it has the ability to address those issues. Because I tell you what, being in office is, I think, a really fulfilling, awesome experience. It's every day I meet somebody new, every day I learn something new, and it opens up all kinds of different opportunities. It'll probably be one of the best experiences of my life, particularly the Nebraska legislature, since we're so unique in many ways. But if I didn't care about the issues that I was addressing, it'd be a real drag, because there's a lot of late nights and you don't get paid very well. And a lot of local offices, you don't get paid anything at all. So the $12,000 a year in the legislature looks really good. When running for office, it's all about relationships. And this goes to a little bit about what Amanda's going to talk about, is civic health. It's all about relationships. It's about building relationships in the community and showing that you're willing to listen and learn. There's so many people that go to the door and knock on that door and tell people exactly what they're going to do, and they don't ask them, what do you care about? That's a huge mistake. And so when you're going door to door, for instance, I would say, hi, my name's Adam Morfeld. I'm running for the legislature, and if there was some kind of identifier, I could tell that they're a teacher, and there's all this technology that you can do now, and they have their names and whether they're a teacher or a union worker or whatever. I would say something about education, but I could talk your ear off. What are you concerned about? And I'd listen. And half the time they'd be like, oh, I'm just concerned about taxes, or I'm just concerned about well-funded education, or whatever. You go, okay, great, thanks. Here's my cell phone. If you have any other questions, have a great day. You've built a relationship there. You've listened to them. And so running for office is all about building relationships. And you can do that through the community leadership positions and the other things that you're doing in your community right now. The other thing that I'll bring up is the raising money. Somebody brought up kind of raising money. Listen, I am not rich. I did not come from a wealthy family at all. After my student loans, I have negative net wealth, and definitely after my mortgage. But some people would say that's an investment. But and I didn't come from a political family either. What I did do, though, was in college, I got really involved in politics and in my community, and I got passionate about it. And then I learned how to do it. That's the other thing, is number one, you don't need a ton of money, to go back to that question, stay on track with that, because you already have networks in your community, whether it be family and friends, that will give you 25 or 50 bucks. And so what you do is you host a house party, usually somebody else hosts it for you, they invite your friends, and you raise $500 or $1,000 or $2,000, and you start building momentum in that sense. And when you're asking for money, Nebraskans don't like to ask other people for money. And it was the worst part about starting a nonprofit for me at first, because I had to ask people for money, and I wasn't used to that. But the worst thing that can happen is what? They say no. That's not that bad of a thing, okay? Because they usually feel bad about it, and they'll do something else for you down the road, whether it be volunteer or maybe they'll give you money down the road. And so that's the worst thing that can happen. And in the scheme of our lives, that's not all that bad. A lot of other things can go worse. So don't think that you have to have a lot of money. Also, I think that campaigns in particular are about, number one, building connections in the community, which you can naturally do outside of the political realm. And then number two, listening to people and being authentic about that, not telling people exactly what you're going to do, but asking and listening. But then three, it's about building that momentum. And if you do those things, if you're going out in the community, you're going door to door, you're going to the community forums, you're talking about your vision for whatever it is, and you're listening, and then you're doing some fundraising on the side for your friends and families and networks, people are going to see that you're organized, that you're intelligent, that you're thoughtful, and that will build momentum. And people will want to rally behind you. And you eventually get to that point. And so don't think that it's insurmountable to run for office. Don't let somebody tell you, oh, I've got to wait in the wings, or whatever the case may be. I've got to wait for so-and-so. Now, I ran for a term-limited seat, so I didn't go against an incumbent. That's another story for another day. But the bottom line is that we need more young Nebraskans in positions of political power, because we're the best situated to understand exactly what's going to, number one, attract young Nebraskans to our communities, keep young Nebraskans here, and policies that allow young Nebraskans to be successful. Because otherwise, when you elect somebody who's 40 years older than us, they have a different worldview and they have different priorities, and rightfully so, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they aren't going to necessarily represent our interests moving forward. Not all the time. You get some exceptions. So the thing that I want you to walk away from, if you haven't already figured it out, is consider running for office. And if you have doubts about it, or you have questions or concerns, or you want me to help you put together kind of a campaign plan, I'm more than happy to do that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or Green Party or Socialist or Communist or whatever. I'm more than happy to kind of guide you through that process and talk a little bit more about that, because those voices are incredibly important in Nebraska. And remember, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and if they don't invite you to the table, pull up your folding chair and bring your voice to that table, because things aren't going to change on a large scale unless we're in the positions of power. And so, thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to talk about some of the baseball.
Great. So as we're finishing up here in the last 10 minutes, I thought we would give you a different way to activate your community engagement, your political involvement. Sorry, I probably should have taken a few more. You're passed them back. Thanks. And really come away, again, with a how, right? How to do this, aside from necessarily running for office, but if change starts at a local level, and if it starts with you, how do I do that? So we do an exercise. It's fairly simple and straightforward. I promise it won't take a lot or ask a lot from you. But it's called community asset mapping. And we think about your community's assets and your ideals and help you kind of put in place, again, that activating action plan to get there. So start up there at the top where it says, let's start with some context. Right underneath that paragraph, list your communities for me. And again, communities don't just have to be geographical. They certainly can be. It could be O'Neill, it could be Lincoln, it can be Ord. But it could also be your group of, a membership organization that you're a part of, the school community that you reside in. It can take a lot of forms. So take a minute and write down 3 to 5 communities or groups of people in which you are involved. What's that? Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. Also, if you were wondering, yes, I did recycle these sheets of paper because I am thrifty like a millennial. Guilty. Also, we work at a nonprofit. All right, you can keep going, you can keep listing communities, but thinking about those communities, the next set of the next paragraph below that, list the things that are assets. What is going well in your community? What is the strength about your community, of communities? It can be many, again, across all of those communities. If you were to tell someone about your community, what would you tell them? What would you brag about? What would you really use to represent your community? Those are all your community assets. They can be physical assets, right? Oh, we have a great community center. We have a YMCA. Beautiful trees. Oh, nothing wrong with that. Home of Arbor Day, right? They can also be cultural assets, right? I think we have a good group of young leaders. I think we have an excellent arts scene in Thedford. So write down some assets or some strengths about your communities. When you're done thinking about assets or strengths, similarly, list some ideals. What would make your community ideal in which to live, right? Areas you can improve, if you want to think about that. Where are you not yet that you want to be? What would wow you? That's another way to think about it. I can ask questions for days, just so you guys know. So what are your assets and what are your liabilities? And then of those, I know I'm going fast. I promise you can do this over and over again. That's why we have similar ones on the back too. Pick one of those assets or liabilities, or ideals rather, and put it in that center round asset or ideal kind of circle in the middle there. You may ask, why would I map an asset? Like, it's already great. Why do I need to improve it? There's always a way to maximize a strength, right? So it can be an asset, it could be an ideal, something that you absolutely want to see changed, again, to improve your community for the future. So either one is fine. And then to the box directly to the left of that, it says implications. And this is the why. Thank you, Simon Sinek, for your book. Why does this matter? If you were to tackle this issue in your community, and if you were to take action on it tomorrow or next week or next month, why would it matter? Would it help create a better social connectedness in your community? Would it help build confidence in your institutions? Would it create higher community engagement? Or does it help increase the political involvement of you or your community members? You don't necessarily just have to couch it in those 4 civic indicators, but that, again, might give you a framework or a structure for doing so. But talk to us about the why this matters if you were to take on this opportunity. I'm going to give you just like 30 seconds at a time. All right, up top, there's that action steps. By up top, I mean of this little diagram here, the tall, skinny box, action steps. This is where you put pen to paper, you put action to the pavement. What would you do to help develop this asset or this ideal? Again, they can be very actionable items. It could look like call the mayor, or it could look like talk to another young person in my community who would also be interested in this. It can be planning, it can be active, it can be short term, it can be long term. But write down at least 3 action steps that would be helpful in achieving this community asset or ideal. Because things don't happen without action, as we all know. And then finally, in the box to the right, it says partners. And this is something we've learned through a lot of community impact projects that we've done, our programs that we've done over the last 8 years. And that is, partners are pretty critical in achieving some of these things. Again, it could be an individual, it could be an organization or a group, it could be a whole system or an institution. So start listing partners, people who can either provide resources for your plan or your project. It could look like a partner who provides awareness of your project, right? Because awareness at some point will be key for others to adopt this or for this to be lasting change. It can look like supportive partners, so people who are helping you do the on-the-ground work. And I know the first time that I did this, it was fascinating, it was an excellent exercise. I was like, yeah, cool, I can do this. And then I thought, I really want to do it again. Different community, different asset, and that's fine. As a young person, you're not just isolated in a silo, so you're gonna wanna do this again, and there's space on the back. It's a fairly straightforward model. Thinking about these 3-4 steps, you can do this over and over again for various communities. You can facilitate this within your communities if you wish, by all means. So, anybody want to share theirs? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but is anybody jazzed about a particular idea that you wrote down? Or do you all just want the next popcorn break? Because I don't blame you there.
How about a minute or two of questions?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Any questions for Adam or I?
None? You guys got it down? Yeah, back there.
What do you think are one or two or a couple like the most pressing issues for rural communities like your first question?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the property tax issue combined with state aid for education, I mean, is a big issue in a lot of rural. That's the one we're hearing about a lot. I'm not quite sure that that's the issue that a lot of young rural folks bring and talk to me about. But then again, I represent a pretty urban district. One of the things that I've worked on, both in Red Cloud and other places, is trying to bring more state investment and resources into building up tourism infrastructure throughout the state and being able to provide more opportunities for people to come to Nebraska and enjoy, or come to rural Nebraska and enjoy, or to bring families and provide opportunities and infrastructure for that. And so that's one issue that I've worked on. That's statewide. I mean, the other thing that's going to be coming up this year, and I just was seeing the Twitter updates, is we're going to have about a $500 million budget shortfall because of commodity prices going in the tank. And so that's going to impact our ability to have resources to do some of the things that we want to do to have the edge. So yeah. So that's what comes to mind right away. I'm sure there's a bunch of others. Yeah. Yeah.
So essentially having the unicameral as a House of Representatives based on how our officials are elected.
Mm-hmm.
As we talk about the rural issues and making sure that that rural perspective is shared, when you're talking about some of these bigger issues, how do we ensure that it's not an us-them conversation?
Like urban versus rural? Yeah. Well, and it's interesting since we have a nonpartisan legislature, and I could go into long detail about why it is, but it really is truly a nonpartisan body. It's mostly disagreements fall along ideological lines and often urban versus rural, particularly with the tax situation going on right now. And so I think that the way that you frame it is first you have to contact your elected official. And I'm surprised how few people contact us actually. And so when they do contact us and they're constituent, we listen. We really do. And so when you're emailing your state representative or whoever it may be, talk about, state that you're a young Nebraskan and you're from a rural area and you're about growing Nebraska for everyone. And if we're either all going to thrive together or we're going to die together. The urban areas are dependent upon success in the rural areas. And the rural areas are dependent upon success in the urban areas in Nebraska. And if you don't believe that, come talk to me afterwards because I can give you some good examples. And so for me, that's the attitude that I take when I'm looking at issues, is that this shouldn't just be an urban issue or a rural issue. Because if rural Nebraska is strong, then urban Nebraska is strong. And talk about that, about how you want the entire state to be strong and that this issue, for this reason, strengthens the entire state. And if you can find an urban hook there, if you're talking to an urban senator, that's always good too. Hopefully the rural senator gets it right away. But be proud that you're a young Nebraskan too, and let them know that, because we don't hear from a lot of young Nebraskans. And so I think the tendency is to, as politicians, is to listen to older Nebraskans because they hold the political power because they're the ones that are the most politically active. And so we have to use our voices more. Does that make sense, or is that too anomalous? Okay, you can email me if you have other questions.
I'm actually going to jump in. I know
Yeah,
it's a question for the legislator, but as a person with a rural background who now is an urban constituent, I think, and it goes back to the social connectedness of Nebraska, nearly everybody in an urban setting or urban situation has some sort of rural tie, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, my grandpa's a farmer, or oh, my dad's a farmer, or shoot, my parents both grew up in Mullen. So there's nearly someone in every urban area that has a connection to rural Nebraska. And I think if you work to find that and understand that there's common ground there, you'll be a lot farther off and kind of keep perpetuating that narrative when you're talking in the kind of political realm as well.
The biggest employer in my urban district is Burlington, Northern Santa Fe. Best paying jobs, 2,000 of them. I can tell you right now the commodity prices going down is going to impact our employment there and how many people we have. So I mean, there's ties.
Oh, there's huge ties.
Yeah.
Kellogg's, Cargill.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's yeah, absolutely.